It's been 3 days now since coordinated terrorist attacks shook Paris and the rest of the world. Over the past 24 hours, we've learned a lot about the forces behind them, and leaders around the globe are taking action. French President François Hollande announced today that France is at war and will intensify its operations in Syria, which he called, quote, the biggest factory of terrorists the world has known. Overnight, they carried out 168 in-country raids, and more than 100 people are now under house arrest in France. Meanwhile, the search for others involved continues in several different countries, including Turkey and Belgium, where there were even more arrests. And the U.S. has announced a new intelligence sharing agreement with France.
The attacks in Paris remind us that it will not be enough to defeat ISIL in Syria and Iraq alone. Here in Antalya, our nation's therefore committed to strengthening border controls, sharing more information, and stepping up our efforts to prevent the flow of foreign fighters in and out of Syria and Iraq.
Both the U.S. and France have been carrying out major airstrikes in Syria over the past couple of days. Meanwhile, ISIS is promising future attacks, including in our nation's capital. Joining me now are Andrea Cabral, she's former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, Jutta Clausen, a terrorism expert at Brandeis University, founder of the Western Jihadism Project, and Charlie Sennett, news analyst here at GBH, who's also head of the Ground Truth Project and co-founder of Global Post. Thank you all for coming. Charlie, let me start for you. 224 people killed on the Russian airliner, 43 killed in Lebanon, 129 so far in Paris. The world seems to have been taken by surprise. Should they have been?
Well, I think we knew that ISIS was expanding its operations, its theater of war, if you will. We knew that they had regional aspirations for a long time, and they had been really successful, right? They took Raqqa, they've taken a lot of areas. Recently, they've been thwarted in that. The U.S. and the Kurdish forces have taken back some of that area. I think we're always going to be shocked when we see a really spectacular terrorist event like this. If we knew it was coming, we would have prepared for it.
But did we even know that things like this were on their agenda? This conventional wisdom is it's all about building a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. That's what most of us have been told, no?
Well, look, I think what we're seeing is a picture emerging like a photograph in a development bath. But you see it after the fact, and then everything starts to make sense. We saw this with 9/11. We've seen this so many times before. Terrorist patterns only emerge after the fact. I think definitely ISIS has gone global in its war. That's the reality, very bleak reality of Paris.
Should we have been surprised by this global strategy, Jutta?
No, I believe it has been in the works for quite a while, and I personally have disagreed with the people who kept saying that we should worry more about the al-Qaeda remnants because the Islamic State was just concerned about its own territory.
Why were they wrong?
Well, it's been very clear that the number one objective for the Islamic State has been to bring in as many people, as many countries into the conflict and spreading the conflict. They set up affiliates in Libya. There are now about 7 or 8 different affiliates of the Islamic State. There's one in the Sinai, there's one in Nigeria, there's even one in Afghanistan. They have known for some time that they couldn't keep the Islamic State in place.
Andrea, even if Jutta was not taken by surprise, it appears our president may have been. Here he was with George Stephanopoulos on ABC just this past Thursday night.
I don't think they're gaining strength. What is true is that from the start, our goal has been first to contain, and we have contained them. They have not gained ground in Iraq, and in Syria, they'll come in, they'll leave, but you don't see this systematic march by ISIL across the terrain.
I don't know if it's fair or not, you'll tell me if you think it is, to infer at least that he didn't see things like Paris coming. I don't mean Paris in particular, but targets like that in the West. Is that a fair jump from what he had to say Thursday night?
He may not have. I don't know that he would have necessarily, in the context of that interview, said that he knew in advance or had some sense of it.
No, I don't mean about Paris in particular, but he was worried about targets in the West.
Right, but and I think the mistake is focusing just on Syria, because no matter what else they're doing, wherever they're gaining ground in countries in the Mideast, what you have is the power of an idea communicated through the internet with infinite reach combined with actual real money and resources on the ground.
Well, how do you know that and he doesn't know that?
No, I'm not suggesting that he doesn't know that. I just said in the context of the interview with George Stephanopoulos, he may not have been willing to say that out loud.
You have to say, one of the things that concerns me, particularly troubling, is when you hear that the French authorities had at least a couple of these people under surveillance at a particular time, and they stopped. And the argument we've heard is, well, limited resources. You just can't keep your eyes on that many people for a long enough period of time. Does that pass the laugh test? Is that credible?
I think it's very disturbing that we hear the same reasons being given again and again every time something goes wrong.
Charlie Hebdo, same deal.
Same story. It's too many, there are too many, we can't track them, we don't have enough information, and encryption technologies and other types of technologies prevent us from following what they're doing. I think the key mistake here is to think that electronic surveillance actually is going to always work. Personally, I suspect that we will hear that these attacks were planned face-to-face in the Islamic State.
You're nodding your head up and down. You agree with that analysis?
I do agree with that, and I also think we maybe are missing a bigger question that we need to put to all of those who want to get this to stop, and that is we're on edge right now. We're fearing attacks in Washington. Paris is reeling, but the question we're not hearing an answer to is, what is the strategy to defeat ISIS on the ground? We've had some successes in taking back Sinjar, their supply lines. There, Jihadi John, who was killed, and Mwazi, who was killed, the executioner of James Foley and others. There are some successes, but there's still no strategy.
Well, the one thing that people seem to agree upon this weekend, Republicans and Democrats, they don't agree on much, seems to be that we have to confront them in Syria. And from most analyses I read, confronting them in Syria means human beings, more ground troops. The president said today, no United States ground troops. Without the United States on the ground in Syria, can they be defeated, Jutta?
No, I don't think so. But the president is also right when he says that we can go in, we can take them out, but what do we do next? We cannot hold the territory. We cannot keep American soldiers in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria forever.
So what is the agenda? What's the strategy?
There has to be a multifaceted approach.
Like what?
Well, first of all, in Europe, the key issue is that the attackers in Paris came from Brussels. They took a car, they drove down. And
weapons from Brussels.
Yes, and this place where they come from, Molenbeek in Brussels, has been a long-known crossroads for terrorists.
So does that mean the end of open borders, what are the Schengen rules or whatever they're called? That's essentially why the EU exists, is it not? To allow people to travel freely. Is this the end of free travel within the continent?
No, I don't believe that. That would be an economic disaster. It would end the European project. I don't think that's going to happen. But what is going to happen is that mayors and governments are going to have to be more willing to confront what happens in their own backyard.
Also, just quickly, I mean, look, ISIS is now fighting a global battle, and they've made that perfectly clear. What we haven't seen is a coordinated global response. And Europe hasn't worked well. The fact that we have an intelligence sharing agreement emerge in the aftermath of Paris, where was it beforehand? How can you not have a better strategy in place?
That's what people said after 9/11 about information sharing between agencies.
And you know,
there were pretty obvious stuff.
There were people in the FBI and the CIA who were putting their finger on that as a problem before 9/11, and there are people putting their fingers on the problems now. The questions, I think, being framed to the president aren't the right ones. I still don't think we've seen a coordinated, concerted strategy on the ground that links up with a global strategy.
Can we, the question I think that our president is probably confronting the most is, could Paris happen here? And the conventional wisdom over the weekend is far, far less likely. Do you agree with that? And if you do, why?
I don't see any reason why it couldn't happen here, and I don't understand anyone who thinks that it is that much less likely to happen. If you are talking about
fewer Muslims who have been to that part of the world and back, fewer Muslim ghettos, treated more respectfully, more tolerance in this place, better surveillance, that's what I hear.
Well,
You're from law enforcement, you don't buy it?
I don't think that you have to be Muslim in order to be a lone wolf extremist. And in fact, if you look at the list of the countries that are where people are coming from to go and train and then come back to their home country, and there are countries everywhere, and the United States has its share that have gone over there.
But a far smaller share.
A far smaller share, but it only took 8 people in Paris. And I just wanted to say to anyone who hasn't read it already, if you read Charlie Pierce's piece in Esquire, where he talks about part of this comprehensive strategy isn't just boots on the ground, it isn't just airstrikes, it's cutting off the money. And that we've known, and in fact he refers to a State Department memo of 2009 signed by Hillary Clinton that says we know that the funders of terrorism come from Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And we know exactly who people are. You freeze their assets in this country, and it has to be a comprehensive response. Your diplomats are out. There are ways to starve it. ISIL is whatever we want to call it, ISIL, ISIS. It is as powerful as it is because of the money. It's the money that drives it.
That's why Hollande says they're bombing the oil fields, by the way, in part. But can I stay in the United States, Jutta, just for a second? I've heard much more optimistic analysis than we're hearing from the former Secretary of Public Safety. What's your take on what our risk situation is?
Well, I guess that I agree that the risk is far lower in this country.
Why?
Well, it actually takes a lot of people to put on a comprehensive attack like
well beyond the 8 that were allegedly involved
well,
here.
19 have been identified as being part of the actual attack on the ground, and far more people have been involved. Add in also that the perpetrators have known each other for at least 3-4 years. It takes a lot of contact and preparation.
Which would be harder here, you think?
Much harder. Those vests, the suicide vests they were wearing would have been fabricated somewhere. They were not made, I think, in an apartment in Paris.
Can we talk about the big strategy here? There are a lot of experts who, I use the term loosely, have said this whole war thing, Hollande calling it war, the Pope calling it World War III, is completely the wrong strategy. It's exactly what ISIS or ISIL or Daesh wants it to be, but in fact it should be a tactical law enforcement, police strategy. Who's right here, Charlie?
I really believe in the strategy that, look, the Islamic State is neither. It's neither Islamic nor a state. It's an ideology, and it's a perverse and very dark and sadistic ideology.
So how do we treat it?
You treat it like a crime, and you start to actually go after this as if it's a criminal enterprise, and stop thinking of it as a war, because they want to engage in a global war that shouldn't exist.
Do you agree with that?
No, I actually think that it is a war as well as a police operation, I think. They are taking, as they say, taking the insurgency to the streets of Europe, and they also want to take it to the Washington,
But certainly
DC.
airstrikes, 150 airstrikes or more by France over Syria in retaliation, really revenge for what happened on the streets of Paris, will not be a strategy that can work. Look,
Well, that was more symbol. Was it not symbol?
But that's what I mean. If we continue to have symbolic, conventional warfare strategies to approach a very complex problem of terrorism and disproportionate warfare, we're going to lose again and again and again. It's got to be criminal, it has to be military on the ground, but more tactical and more global in its approach.
Can you break the tie in 15 seconds?
I absolutely agree with Charlie. I think the way that we refer to the particular group and the way that we refer to how we're going to deal with them validates them and gives them much more power when we start to call it a war versus law enforcement quasi-military action. I absolutely agree
Only
with
have
that.
30 seconds to go down the line. The climate conference, huge international, 2 weeks from today. Should it go on as planned, just with additional security?
Yes.
How about you?
Absolutely.
And
Yes, and we'll be there.
you
Covering
will.
it.
Ground Truth Project, correct. Andrew Cabral, good
Nice
to see you.
you.
Jutta, very good to meet you. Thanks so much for your time. Charlie,
Jim.
good to see you as well. Thanks so much.